Helen Goodman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth, and to thank the Backbench Business Committee for ensuring that we have this important debate. I was somewhat taken aback by the roseate picture that the member for Carrick and Cumnock gave us. It doesn't square with my own experience in my constituency, and I want to outline why that is. The problem of cuts to disability benefits has affected a lot of my constituents very badly indeed. And this is in large part because although Durham is no longer a mining area, there is a legacy of heavy industry in our area. And the healthy life expectancy across the country as a whole may be 69 years, but in County Durham it's 59. So this means that many people under pension age are in need of support from the social security system, and they need disability benefits. One of the problems, obviously, is the interaction with other parts of the benefit system. These are serious and complex. So to go back to the issue of the bedroom tax, which we debated at length in 2014, obviously this has affected adversely those people who needed a spare room for a carer in their family, which they are now financially penalised for using. Another group of people who are badly affected are the WASPy women. These people, I had a fantastic meeting with 300 WASPy women in my constituency. Now, some people who turned up were hale and hearty, but a considerable number of people turned up who were seriously ill and had disabilities, and some of these people had been at work at the age of 15, and their bodies are now worn out. And the Minister must know that this is an issue, because she will have seen the very significant increase in the number of women over the age of 55 who've had to go on to ESA. One woman recently came to see me. She'd had to stop work because she had cancer, and her doctor said she could no longer do a part-time job. Because her job had been part-time, she wasn't entitled to contributory ESA. Because she had an occupational pension of £60 a week, she is not entitled to any other money from the social security system. Another family came to see me. The mother had been disqualified for benefit when she moved from DLA to PIP. And at the stroke of a pen, she lost that benefit, her son lost carer's allowance, and they lost housing benefit. They were losing £8,000 a year. Their income was just being halved by the change in assessment. Then, as my honourable friend said, we have the whole problem of the Motability cuts. Now, everybody wants to help and support people who go out to work when they have a disability. And the cuts to Motability have been one of the most destructive, futile and pointless cuts one could possibly dream up. A young woman came to see me. She had dwarfism. She had succeeded in getting a university degree and holding down a job. When her Motability was taken from her, of course her whole life was put into chaos. Then we have the benefit freezes, which adversely affect this group of people. We're now seeing people with disabilities and chronic illnesses moved onto universal credit, gradually at first, but I know more in future. This means that this is another group of people who are going to be suffering from the delays in benefit payments and the debt that people are pushed into. So when ministers talk about being fiscally responsible and having a welfare cut and the fantastic savings they've got out of the social security budget, the truth is these savings have been achieved on the backs of people like my constituents with severe disabilities and health problems. I want to talk in particular about the move from DLA to PIP and ESA. Now, I cannot think of a worse named benefit than PIP. It's not really personal, it doesn't give people independence, and there isn't much of a payment if you do manage to get it. There's massive confusion among the public when they thought that they were entitled to DLA for life. Some people were in receipt of higher level DLA, and then they get 0 points and no PIP whatsoever. My constituency caseworker, who has dealt with hundreds of cases over the last couple of years, has an 82% success record on appeals. Now, no benefit where you are getting the decisions overturned 82% of the time.
Is she aware of the fact that 75% of PIP decisions and 74% of ESA decisions were overturned on appeal in Wales in 2017? Doesn't that lead her to the conclusion that this is an utterly dysfunctional and shambolic system, which is a huge waste of resources and of taxpayers' money? So it's not only callous and cruel, it is also not value for money.
Well, my honourable friend has expressed it very well. I didn't know those Welsh statistics, but they're obviously it's obviously a very similar experience in Wales and in Durham. And perhaps that's not surprising because it's another area with a heavy industry legacy that people are coping with. I'm happy to give way.
Where I'm from, again, in Swansea, we've got a situation where some of the most vulnerable people are going through a dreadful anguish and anxiety, thinking though they're chronically ill, they think they won't end up with benefits. And isn't this part of a wider strategy, basically to squeeze the poorest and most vulnerable to pay for the bankers' greed that led to the 2008 financial crisis?
Well, I mean, it is extraordinary that the government have been able to find money to cut inheritance tax for the richest, but can't find money for people with disabilities and mental health problems. So, as my honourable friends have said, the stress and distress caused, particularly to people with mental health problems, are a serious problem. People are put into a situation of tension because they don't know when or whether they're going to be reassessed. And I have constituents who are concerned for their family members' well-being because they get so anxious because they can't face these work capability assessments. Now, if I could just turn to the problem of ESA. The Honourable Member for Ayr was talking about how we need to encourage and support people to go back to work. And this is indeed true. But the fact is, from the point of view of an employer, employing people with disabilities means higher employee liability insurance. It means adjustments at work very often, and there is simply no incentive for people. The Minister is saying rubbish from a sedentary position. Would he like to come to the dispatch box and tell me why that is rubbish?
Both as a Member of Parliament in my constituency office and as somebody who ran a business for 10 years, I employed disabled people and I benefited. It takes good employers to have a wide-ranging workforce, and if you get it right, it's a win-win for everybody. I don't recognise the situation that the honourable lady is saying.
Well, that is I'm glad that the honourable gentleman did what he did, but we do also hear from people who can't get jobs because of their disabilities, and we do also hear from employers who say it is too expensive to make the adjustments.
thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Just on that point about it being too expensive, does she then recognise the support to work schemes that have been introduced by this government, which now reach £57,000 per employee, which can help negate some of those costs and support disabled people in their work?
If those schemes were so good, then the number of people with disabilities who are in work, the rate of those people would have gone up. But as my honourable friend who opened the debate pointed out, that proportion has not increased one jot in the last 8 years. So let me talk...
My friend, I'm grateful to her for giving way. She's right about that. And of course, she'll recall that the gap between the employment rate of disabled people and the overall average was falling steadily until 2010. It's flatlined ever since. Does she share my disappointment that the government no longer has a target for reducing the disability employment gap, the target initially set by David Cameron but since abandoned, unfortunately?
Well, my honourable friend who has a proud record as a minister tackling these issues when we had a Labour government has pointed out that the twists and turns of policy, and it is patently ridiculous for ministers following the UN report to be complacent in this area. There is no room for complacency whatsoever. Let me turn to the problem of employment support allowance and illustrate the difficulties with some stories of constituents of mine. Mrs M, who is 63, had to stop working as a carer through ill health. She was signed off by her GP. She has Paget's disease, a tumour on her leg. She sees an oncologist. She needs a new hip. She's seeing a surgeon with because she needs a new knee. She has heart arrhythmia on the left side and sees a cardiologist about this. She was refused ESA at assessment and had to apply for JSA and was advised to apply for jobs as a roofer, bouncer or consider retraining as a social worker. Well, obviously, we supported her appeal and ESA was awarded. This is patently ridiculous that people have to go through this sort of thing. Take Mr. C. Mr. C was 60. He had previously been awarded DLA following a series of strokes. He was transferred to PIP in January 2018, awarded a high rate for both care and mobility. He put in an ESA assessment request in September 2018, but he got confused because all his medical information had been sent to DWP for the PIP assessment, and he was then expected to pay again for the medical evidence to submit for the ESA application. Now, why can't the department sort out its administration instead of putting these financial burdens onto our vulnerable constituents? Then we come to Mr. I. Mr. I is 64. He was previously awarded PIP. He was reassessed in September 2018. The award was unchanged, 8 points for mobility because he cannot move unaided for 50 metres. His ESA assessment in October 2018 also failed because he can move to 200 metres using a wheelchair. He's currently awaiting a mandatory reconsideration. And one of the confusions here, of course, is that people simply can't understand how they can be awarded a high award in the PIP assessment and then be required to work when they come to the ESA assessment. The things just don't stack up. And one of the reasons they don't stack up is because of the amateurish and unqualified nature of the staff doing the assessments. This has been a problem from the off with this, and ministers have had 8 years to sort it out, in which time they have failed. Let me tell the story of Mr. J. Mr. J is autistic and has various mental impairments. He was getting DLA, he was moved over to PIP. He applied for ESA and placed in the support group. He was unaware that his ESA was contribution-based, not income-based. And so when he went to the chemist and was given the prescription form, he ticked the box because he had previously been entitled to free prescriptions and was no longer. So his mother, they got the fine, which they had to pay in the family. His mother had to intervene and become the appointee to deal with the issue, since he was plainly not capable of doing it himself. Now, Mr. J is not a one-off. Mr. J is not unusual. 5 years ago, 30,000 people in this country were fined for falsely saying that they were entitled to NHS prescriptions. Last year it was 1 million, and it was 1 million because the Department of Health and the Department of Work and Pensions are not properly coordinated. The Department of Work and Pensions do not give people the information they need when they get their benefits, and the Department of Health are hounding them for money. Now, for the Minister, on a nice ministerial salary of £98,000 a year, maybe a £100 fine isn't a lot. But for people who are on incomes of £100, £150, that's a whole week's income. This is a complete disgrace. It is utterly careless. We have brought this to ministers for the last 6 months. They've still not sorted it out. I am not saying that ministers set out to fine 1 million people. Of course not. That would be a ridiculous assertion. But sometimes it's culpable to be careless, and this government is careless of disabled people.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If I may, I'd like to bring the debate back to the actual motion, which is commissioning an independent assessment of the cumulative impact of changes to the social security system. And it's an important issue, and it's quite right that we should discuss this today. I must say that it's an honour to follow the impassioned speech for the member for Bishop Auckland. Of course, we must ensure that the social security system works for everyone. It should be a safety net to help those who have fallen on hard times. But it should also help people to stand on their own 2 feet. And for those who can't, it should be there to support people who have fallen on hard times to lead decent lives. So if we are properly to consider this motion today, we must recognise that because of this government, disability spending will be higher in every year to 2020 relative to both 2010 and today. And thanks to the government's reforms, the average weekly award of PIP is over £13 higher than it was on the old DLA, and 87% of claimants say they're satisfied with their claimant journey. And in this year alone, £50 billion will be spent to support people with disabilities and health conditions. There are more achievements that I could stand here and natter on about, but for the sake of brevity, I will just say that this government does have a strong track record on disability support. Moreover, the NHS, which has now been given a record level of funding thanks to this government, will continue to offer unparalleled care to people with poor health. And as for carers, since 2010, the rate of carers allowance, CA, has increased from £116 to £120, meaning there's more support available for carers, and this has grown faster than wages. In the context of today's motion, I come back to that again, it is certainly good news, and these changes will almost certainly have a positive impact within the wider social security system, and will benefit sick and disabled people, their families and carers. And I don't think we need an independent assessment to tell us that. Now, a quick point, if I may, about universal credit, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I believe that any social security system should be looking to help people into work and giving them that satisfaction, rather than creating yet another culture of dependency that this country simply cannot afford. It's estimated that universal credit will help 200,000 more people into work when fully rolled out, and will empower people to work an extra 113 million hours per year. And for disabled people specifically, they have a boosted income of around £110 a month, thanks to increased support under universal credit. In fact, on a recent visit to my local job centre, my staff and I found that the majority of claimants in my constituency are happy with universal credit, and according to job centre staff. In fact, the staff there are really happy to be dealing with it. They prefer it to the old legacy benefits. Although in Clacton I did have one case recently of a disabled gentleman who was struggling to find outreach support from the job centre. Now, with the assistance of a local councillor, we were able to assist this gentleman, and I raised the case, and this point was brought up earlier, of outreach and getting to know what is available at the job centre. And I raised this case with the Secretary of State this week, and I'm pleased that she said she would look at ways to promote that outreach so that people are aware of the services that are offered at our job centres. Madam Deputy Speaker, well, of course I'll give way. I'll be happy to.
Thank you very much. And the honourable gentleman is painting an extremely rosy picture of circumstances in Clacton. Is he aware of the visit to Clacton of the UN Special Rapporteur on Poverty a month ago and the report that he made of the very serious poverty he found there and the lack of support for people, including those with disabilities?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. Yes, of course I am aware of the visit of the UN Rapporteur, who I met for 2 hours, and he spent, I think, 2 hours in Jaywick, where there are problems, absolutely, and he arrived, he spoke to the people of Jaywick, and he went away in 2 hours. Total disrespect for the staff, and the officers of the local council have been working so hard for so long to improve the situation in Jaywick. We are building 10 more houses there. 5 for council houses, 5 for starter homes. We have bought 30 hectares of land, and we are expanding our works in Jaywick, and things in Jaywick are improving. Moreover, what the rapporteur's visit did for the people of Jaywick is it irritated them greatly that somebody yet again has come to Jaywick, looked at it and said, look at this is a bad place to live. No, it's not. It's a wonderful place to live with a wonderful community who are on the up at the moment. Now, I'm sorry, I come back to my... thank you for the intervention. I enjoyed that hugely. But I'd like to come back to our party's history on disabled support. We were the party that introduced the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, a groundbreaking act that was subsequently amended and replaced by the Equality Act of 2010. And on the specific point about an independent assessment, it is because of the change of legislative changes that we started. All departments and public bodies now have a responsibility for considering and monitoring the impact of policies on disabled people. This is the case for all policy, not just disability-related policies. Finally, and this is the crucial point, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we were to commission this assessment, we must recognise that the DWP does not believe it is methodologically sound to publish a cumulative impact separately for disabled people. And the main reasons are that the Department's survey data is limited, particularly in capturing the severity of the disability. And because most people live in households with others, the Department does not know how incomes are shared. It is very hard to look at the effects of separately for the disabled. And this will be the case for an independent body too. So there is no point in commissioning what would be a flawed and inaccurate assessment. This helps nobody. Thank you.
Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate my colleague from Alderbees and Saddleworth for securing this important debate, and I appreciate the Backbench Business Committee granting it. It's an interesting one, because there are some elements of universal credit I support. I remember supporting it in the coalition. There were elements of it that I pointed out at the time that would cause problems. Some of what I said was taken on board. Unfortunately, some wasn't, and we reaped the whirlwind all these years later. I was disappointed on universal credit that a key element of it, which I supported avidly, was around working allowance, that was cut to ribbons in 2015, but I was delighted only a few months ago if not the full amount was restored, 1.9 billion or 1.7 billion was. So, you know, there's a bit of progress. Now, the main reason I'm supporting this debate, and I worked with my honourable friend, even though different parties, on the Work and Pension Select Committee in 2010-2015, and we saw a lot of things in the same light. And so for that, that's one of the reasons why I actually think the request and the requirement today is not unreasonable. If you have a disability, and particularly if you're someone who either was born with a disability or acquired it when you're very, very young, the challenge of getting into work is really difficult. I know that hugely. I've been working in this area for over 30 years. In fact, it's quite interesting with all the kerfuffle that we had earlier. I've been hard of hearing for 50 years, so I'm quite a good lip speaker, but I have kept silent over the issue. I decided there was enough Sturm and Drang without me chucking into it, so I'm going to rise above that. One of the challenges if you're disabled is that you face barriers to employment, you face barriers to education. There are a lot of different barriers. And I think it was a minister or one of the honourable members opposite made a very true point that it was actually the Conservatives in the early 90s who introduced the DDA. I know that well because I helped campaign for it all those years ago when I was young and had no grey hair. I met John Major at the time. And very impressive he was on this issue, I have to tell you. And the DDA was a game changer, huge game changer, because without that law, I don't think we'd have made anywhere near the advances around disability discrimination, both on services and employment, that we've made. However, there's still such a long way to go. There is such a long way to go. And that's often because people don't understand, they really don't understand the barriers to, say, employment for disabled people. They will often, governments of all sides will often point out all the areas where someone acquires a disability in work, but under the DDA they keep their job. That's a great thing, that's really important. But actually I know loads of disabled people who would give their right arm to be given a job, to get in the door. When you don't have a disability but sadly acquire it through illness or what have you, the system is much better now at protecting you. It really is, and that's a fantastic progress. What it doesn't do, and this has barely changed in the years I've been in politics and the years before when I was involved in this area, it's still incredibly hard if you are disabled to get a job. Incredibly hard. Now, if on top of that, you have, in my view, what was a fundamentally unwise move by the DWP a couple of years ago, before the present ministers were in situ, is that they changed elements of the work capability assessment from, they still have a support group and a couple of the other groups, but what they did is that they changed the, I can't remember the quiet name, the part of the ASA that's helping people, disabled people get work, is they changed the income so it's the same as JCA or only just above, away from the higher amount in the support group. Now, I can tell you that was such a foolish move. I remember I wasn't MP then because I briefly, after 2015, wasn't an MP for 2 years till I won it back. And I remember at the time writing to my colleagues and writing to the then ministers, pointing out that if you remove that additional payment for disabled people who agree they're prepared to try and find work with support, if you take their income down to 20% almost, less than what it was, and that it is in the support group, human nature is human nature. What people will do is they will strive darn hard to get in the support group, because that's not wrong, that's what happens. If I've been off work for 5, 6, 7 years, but I'm persuaded by my work coach, the Job Centre Plus, to go into an ESA cohort that gives me a little more money than pure GSA, a little less than support group, but more money than JSA, I'm willing to go into that group A, because there's more income, B, because the work coach is there to help me try to get into work. If you then change the rules, which means my money is exactly the same as it would be in JSA, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'm going to try and stay in the support group. That's what you do. That's human nature. That's what I would do. It's bonkers not to be perfectly honest. So that was really frustrating, and I'm unsurprised to see over the ensuing couple of years since I've come back that there have been real problems in that area, and a lot of people have been moving over to the support group where perhaps they wouldn't have been. You then still have really odd anomalies. I was talking to a constituent recently. I've been helping a constituent recently. As with my office, I try where I can to provide support at tribunals. So one of my team, and I'm training up a second member, they go and act as advocates at tribunals. And we had one recently where this chap had been working for the DWP locally, the Job Centre Plus, for X number of years. Unfortunately, he became ill. DWP did their best to work him through that process, so I'm not knocking that. But after a period of a couple of years, it was clear his illness was stopping him working effectively or even part-time, so he was let go under a proper due process. I have no complaints, neither did he. 2 years later, he's on ESA, he's off to a work capability assessment, and the reason being is that the DWP system saying, no, you're not disabled enough to have these benefits. So he was disabled enough to be made redundant, but not disabled enough a few years later to actually get the benefits. It was ridiculous. I don't believe it was a conspiracy. I believe it was classic, dim bureaucracy. Anyway, my colleague joined him in the tribunal. Bang, we won it. And he's getting all the benefits that he is entitled to. My point behind that is that clunkiness happens more often if you're disabled. It just does, folks. I know so much about this subject with so many thousands of people I've worked with over years. And so that's why I believe it needs an assessment, you see. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I really don't. I don't agree with all the things that it requires on here. My colleague from Oldham East and Saddleworth would be surprised if I agreed with her on everything. But I agree with her on this. We need an assessment specifically around, an impact assessment specifically around disabled people and the impact the changes are having. Because if we don't do that, I do fear for the million migration, the really huge migration, even though I do accept that the government has been making improvements to universal credit. It's a bit through gritted teeth sometimes from the government, but it is, Minister, trust me. But they are making some good amendments. That's why I don't think it's unreasonable for this assessment. I think it should be independent. I think it should be focused on disabled people. Yes, I will. So if I give way to my...
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I wondered if he was aware of the Centre for Welfare Reform's recent publication of its analysis of the government's reasons for not producing a CIA. In summary, the Centre found no good reason for the government not to evaluate the combined impact of its own policies.
I thank the honourable member for intervention. I wasn't aware of that, and that makes my case perfectly, because as my honourable friend knows, that's a good lobby group, but from a different perspective. It's from right of centre. So what we've got is possibly left of centre, which is an empty void these days, but that's by the by, and right of centre saying to the government, have that impact assessment. Yes, certainly.
Would the honourable gentleman not agree that if the impact assessment is based on faulty data and therefore would come up with sort of faulty answers, it's not worth having?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I say with genuine respect, I think the government department spinning to my honourable friend on that. I know a lot about stats, I know a lot about disability stats, I know a lot about all the different government DWP and disability stats, and so I'm afraid on that one I do not believe personally that it would be beyond the wit of man to come up with a model that actually gets over the particular hurdle he's talking about. My view is that that hurdle is not as dramatic as the DWP is saying. We may have to agree to disagree, but I genuinely believe that, having worked a lot over the years with different governments within the DWP. So I'll close. I know there are others who wish to speak. I do not believe this is an unreasonable request. I actually think it would do the government credit to accept it. And on that basis, I hope the Minister's listening. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.